Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the FORTRAN guy, and what we're going to do today is we're going to do a quick little video on really two subjects and two subjects only. That's comments and constants. Now in the previous video we talked about variables, creating them, using them, but there's also something I actually forgot to do it, so I'm going to do it in this video, where we talk about constants and comments. Now constants are variables that can never be changed. You can never change their value. They're good for things like number of states in the United States. They're good for the value of pi, things like that. Things are not going to change. Now if a value is going to change over time, like it's very possible for the number of states in the United States to change from 50 to 51 or 52. So maybe you don't want to make that a constant. Maybe you make it some kind of a global constant that once it changes, you can change it in one place for everything. And that's really the whole point of a constant, is that it can't be changed because it's a constant value. Pi is a perfect example. And then comments, those are the self-documenting, they should be self-documenting text that you use in a program that the compiler ignores. It doesn't actually process those statements, but it's there to tell yourself later on, or maybe another programmer, what you did, why you did it, maybe when you did it, your name, your employee ID, whatever. And companies have a lot of very stringent rules on comments. Why? Because comments really make your code easier to follow, self-documenting, and especially if you decide to go get a job someplace else, somebody who takes your code and has to modify it can then know exactly what you did and why you did it in the program. So let's take a look at both comments and constants. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new project here. And actually, I already have a project called comments. Let's get rid of that and let's start from scratch. And I'm just going to call this one constants. And let's edit the code. Now, before we actually do a constant, let's create some comments. Now, a comment, there's actually two ways of creating a comment. There's the freeform method, which simply uses the exclamation point. The exclamation point is used nowhere in the FORTRAN language that I know of for any other special symbol. It's now used as a comment. And anything after the exclamation mark is considered a comment, and it's ignored by the compiler. However, it's not ignored by your boss, and it's not ignored by other people that are wondering what it is this program does. So what you actually want to do with comments is do something like description. You might want to say initial date. You might want to say programmer, created by. You might even want to maybe put in your employee number. It all depends upon what your company requires with comments. Now, if you notice in our Genie editor, I've got this little minus sign. I can actually compress comments into a small area if I don't want to see them. But it gives you a lot of information. You also might want to say something like change log. Oh, I've done this a million times. And then you might have something like you have the date, programmer ID, and the description. So you might do something like that. And you might be wondering right now, what is this old fart talking about? Well, I'm telling you, companies require these and they're unbelievably useful. So I'm going to go ahead and say 2024-03-10. Now, one thing some people might ask me, and it happens all the time, is do I have to put an exclamation mark before every comment in FORTRAN? Is there a way to do what they call block comments? In C and C++, a double slash is a line comment. It means anything after that double slash is a comment. There's also a thing called a block comment. And a block comment is anything between a slash asterisk, anything between this and between this. So it makes it a lot easier, but you don't really even need these asterisks there. Anything in between those You know, that's a comment, that's a comment, that's a comment. Now in FORTRAN, there's no such thing as block comments. There's some tricks you can use, but it's not really advisable to do that. You're kind of stuck with what the language has, but these comments can be anywhere. Like I can go at the end of this line and say, this line prints hello world. I know that's a stupid comment. I personally wouldn't put that comment in there, but if you're doing some kind of a mathematical calculation, that kind of a comment would be very, very useful. Now there are some FORTRAN compilers out there. A lot of them are called fixed line or fixed format compilers, where you're not allowed to put any code in the first character of a line. If there's an asterisk, if there's a C, or if there's a lowercase c, that entire line is a comment, and you don't have the ability of putting an exclamation mark anywhere you want. And by the compilers that allow you to do this, these are called freeform FORTRAN compilers, and they're pretty much the way it is today. I mean, that's the way whenever you write a new program in FORTRAN, you're pretty much going to do use a freeform compiler. However, there's a lot of old FORTRAN code out there. There's a lot of FORTRAN code that's still being used. I happen to know for a fact a lot of the weather, National Weather Service uses FORTRAN code to do models and things like that. They don't want to rewrite all their code in the new FORTRAN because, I mean, why? If it's working, why break it? So just take a look at your documentation. I actually have an example of this here in my FORTRAN projects. I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the IBM documentation. And inside the IBM documentation, I believe right here on page 10, it talks about a comment line begins with a C, a lowercase c, or an asterisk in column 1. Or if the entire line is white space. In other words, there's no character, it's just all blank. Okay, that's considered a comment. Comments can also be followed by an exclamation mark, except when the exclamation mark is in column 6. So depending upon the compiler you've got, it all depends upon what the rules are. And I just went through here and looked for the word comments. And the Intel compiler is the same way. If I go over here to the Intel documentation and I do a search, now it's a lot more time to find comments in here in the Intel, because there's just a lot more documentation here than it's in the IBM. So it might take a little bit longer. But that's one of the things you do as a programmer, is when you're asked to do a program, to modify a program, or to write a program, you've got to take a look and see what the rules are for that language. So like here's an example of the Intel. I found it. The exclamation mark can be used in all forms of the current compiler to start a comment. In the fixed format, you can use the exclamation, the uppercase, or the asterisk. Now in the IBM, you can also use the lowercase. So there's continuation lines, things like that. So it's always a good idea to take a look at that. So that is comments in FORTRAN. Now, what is a constant? A constant is a variable whose value will never change. So I always like to put my variables up on top of any of my code. So I'm going to create an integer variable called, I don't know, num months. So I'm going to say I want to create an integer. It's going to be a parameter, and the name of the variable is num months, and we give it a value. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm just going to say print. Take a look at the next video for more information on how to do prints. So I'm going to say print num months. Let's save and build that. And then now let's run it. And you can see it printed 12 of some months. Now let's go ahead and try to change it. So I'm going to say num months equals 99. And then I'm going to say print num months. Let's see what happens. Well, we got a compiler error. It says named constant num months in variable definition context. So I'm trying to assign a value to num months. So you really can't do that. So once you create a variable, which happens to be a parameter, which is a constant, once you create it, you can't change it. Now that can be actually kind of confusing, right? Well, what a lot of programmers do especially in C and C++, and I do this in all languages, I make my constants all uppercase. And that way, if I try to change it, I'm going to say, oops, wait a minute, that's all uppercase, so it must be a constant. I can't do that, so I won't even get that error. And it's actually very, very rare for me personally that I've ever done that. Now, constants can also be used to assign to variables. So if I say integer or temp int equals 0, I can then come down here and say temp int equals num months. Notice I used all uppercase, so that reminded me, and I'm going to say print temp int. Let's save and build that. And now let's run it, and you can see that the 12. So it copied over. Now, I have no, actually, no, I do. Well, it also depends upon the language, right? This variable does not actually take up any memory space. In C and C++, when you create a constant, it's just a replaceable value. So anywhere in the program, anywhere that the compiler sees the word num months, it's simply going to override it with the number 12. So it's not actually going to take up any memory. In C and C++, and I've tried this, I could create 1,000,000 of those constants. I would compile the program. It would be no bigger than a program that only had one of those constants defined. So it doesn't actually take up any memory. It's just used for copy and paste by the compiler to override it in your source code. That's great, right? You can have as many constants as you want. It doesn't take up any memory. Now, I don't know that for a fact with FORTRAN. I would be surprised if it was different. But then again, I might not be too surprised because FORTRAN has been around since 1957. But the compilers have evolved and they've gotten better over time. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I think the FORTRAN compiler was good from day one. It's just a high-performance compiler, especially for scientists and mathematicians. Okay, so that's comments, that is constants in FORTRAN. You saw me create an integer constant. You can create a real constant. You can create a character constant. There's all kinds of constants. Use them quite often, especially when you're talking about the size of an array. Instead of having to put in the actual numeric value for the size of an array, you put it in a constant. So if you've got loops, if you've got if statements, you don't have to change it every place, for the width of, or the size of that array. You don't have to change it in multiple places. You just change it in one constant. So constants are unbelievably useful. However, comments even more so because they help you self-document your program for the next programmer. There's code out there that's been out there since the 50s. It's still in use, believe it or not. And without comments, it could be really a problem trying to figure out what the program's trying to do. Especially in older versions of FORTRAN where the variable name could only be 7 or 8 characters long, you don't have a lot of room to create a variable name that's self-explanatory, so you might have to comment what that variable name. Perfect example, the variable name x, right? What does that mean? But if you comment it, you can always look. So, next video, we're going to talk about printing to the screen. Hope to see you then.